Hello and welcome back. In the last few years in Sweden, there's been a sudden rapid growth in issuance volumes in the local currency corporate bond market. In the first 5 months of this year alone, volumes in Swedish krona have been around 45 billion, the highest ever issued. Well, with me to examine this and corporate bond markets in Scandinavia more generally is Landeman, Head of Credit Analysis at Danske Markets in Stockholm. Louis, thank you for joining me today. Now, you heard the intro there on Swedish bond markets. Why is this surge in issuance volumes taking place? Is there anything dangerous about the sudden increase? And just how accessible is the market for smaller companies now?
I don't think it's particularly dangerous. I rather see it as a direct consequence of the financial crisis when bank funding became more scarce and more expensive. So that created a need for companies to seek other means of financing. And so I think it's three main reasons. The first is diversification. The second would be flexibility in terms of covenants, etc. And the third would be the cost of funding, where especially some state-owned companies can actually get very cheap funding in the corporate bond markets at the moment.
So what type of investors buy these bonds?
Well, I mean, the large majority would be Swedish institutional investors. So you also have, of course, from their point of view, this search of yield when you have, at least in Sweden, extremely low government bond yields. Of course, they are looking for other options in terms to get additional yield, but also have some stability. So corporate bonds would then be something in between government bonds and equity. So and they have a great interest, and you also have some private wealth clients and also some foreign investors.
But are there any risks where, for example, the corporate bond market dries up if there was another financial crisis?
Of course, you do have that type of risk, but the way I see it is quite limited because still the bulk of the market is solid investment-grade companies. And actually the fact is that for those type of issuers, the market was indeed open also during the most recent financial crisis, and several of them could issue bonds even at that point in time. So I think that risk is limited. But where you do have that risk is the high yield segment of the market that tends to be a bit more volatile. But the good thing is the Swedish banks are still in very good shape. So if that would happen, I would expect that the banks would still be, like an available source of financing for the majority of these companies.
Looking further afield, what's the trend look like in other Scandinavian countries, like Norway, for example?
Yeah, the situation in Norway is quite interesting because you have sort of the inverse type of corporate bond market than what you have in Sweden. Because in Norway, the majority of the market for corporate bonds is actually in the high-yield segment. And that is explained, I think, by the different industry structure you have in Norway versus Sweden, where in Norway you have more capital-intensive industries like oil and gas and shipping. They actually have a lack of capital. So corporate bonds is an excellent way of sort of fulfilling that gap. But that also means, of course, that the risk and the volatility of the market is very different from what you have in Sweden. In Sweden, it's more, let's say, diversified. You have a different industry base. You have these very large companies like Volvo, Scania, Electrolux, and all those. And then you have kind of the high yield issuers on top of that. So it's a very different situation. But I'd say also the Norwegian market has also shown very good growth. And I would expect that also to continue to grow going forward.
Finally, Louis, what can we expect going forward?
Yeah, we do expect continued growth, but of course, I mean, the last 2 years have seen growth rate of, like 30-40% annually, and of course that's not sustainable. So I think the rate of growth will slow down going forward. But I would expect also we would continue to see a good flow of new issuers coming to the market, and also interestingly, quite a lot of these smaller companies come without any public credit ratings. So that's also something that makes it rather easy for them to access the market. So that's also an interesting trend, and I would expect that to also continue going forward.
Okay, that's all for now here on Dukascopy TV. I'll be back tomorrow with an update on UK GDP growth rate and, of course, the rate decision from the BOE from new Governor Mark Carney. Until next time, goodbye.